Hello everyone, welcome to Inconvenient Truths. I'm your host, Jennifer Zeng. Yesterday I read an article in the Epoch Times with such a title. It is the Taiwan Strait, not Ukraine, that will trigger World War III. The other day, I also read a report saying that Fiona Hill, a former U.S. national security official and senior director of European and Russian affairs, believes that World War III has already broken out. Today, I'd like to use these two reports to share some of my thoughts on the Russia-Ukraine war that is on everyone's mind, as well as my understanding that of the really important war that will decide the life and death of mankind. Before we talk about ugly wars, let's watch something beautiful first.
Experience China before communism. The life-changing performance, Shen Yun. Buy tickets on shenyun.com.
Well, that ad is for Lincoln Center in New York. It will be there from March 10th to 20th. Tickets are on sale now. And the show is also in other cities too. Shen Yun has 7 equally large companies that are touring the world now. Just type in the address you are seeing on the screen. That is shenyun.show/Jennifer-Zeng. You can check the show schedule in your city. Buy from this address and you'll avoid the handling fee. It is a special offer for the audience of my channel only, but you are welcome to share it with friends and family. I'll put this URL in the description box so you can easily forward it to your friends and family so they can also benefit. Okay, now let's talk about the Russia and the Ukraine war. The main point of the article is the Taiwan Strait, not Ukraine, that will trigger World War III is this. Although Russia and the CCP sleep in the same bed, they dream about different things. They are not really together, and it is the Taiwan Strait, not Ukraine, that could really trigger World War III. The author of this article is Yuan Hongbin, a law professor from Peking University. He said, Putin's invasion of Ukraine can only set off a storm in the teapot, and this teapot is, of course, Ukraine. Although Putin has the ambition to expand, Russia's economic power is not big enough to support his ambition. Yuan said Putin doesn't have that big of an ambition anyway. His main pursuits are 1. To expand his control over eastern Ukraine, to demilitarize Ukraine, to disarm Ukraine. 2. To install a puppet regime or to take the current regime surrender. And 3. To stop NATO's eastward expansion. Yuan Hongbin believes that in the eyes of the United States and Europe, Ukraine is not a place worthy of a nuclear war with Russia. The war in Ukraine will be over soon. He believes that regardless of whether Putin attacks Ukraine or not, the CCP will invade Taiwan by force, and the timing will be in 2024, just before the next US election. And it is only when Xi Jinping starts a war in the Taiwan Strait that there is a real possibility of World War III. Although I take a different view on whether Xi Jinping will invade Taiwan or not, which I don't think is very likely now, I agree with him on another point, which is that the West, Europe, and the United States have made an extremely wrong choice in isolating Russia. They have treated the CCP as a friend in the past 2 decades and adopted an appeasement policy towards the CCP, but they are pushing Russia away every step on the way until finally Russia chose to seek partnership with the CCP. In fact, if we can jump out and look back further, we can see that in the decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, the CCP has done far more harm to the world than Russia. Let's start with the most recent events from the past 2 years. How can we estimate the huge loss of lives and economic damage caused to all the countries by the CCP virus? That could be many, many, many times more than the loss of a war, right? And what's even stranger is that nobody is talking about tracing the origin of the virus and holding the CCP accountable anymore. If you talk about it, your videos might get a yellow flag from YouTube. By the way, almost all my videos here get a yellow flag as soon as they're online, which means I won't have any ad income at all. Sometimes after I appeal, they removed the yellow flag, but it will be several days later when not many people are still watching them. So I earn virtually nothing from YouTube. Okay, let's go back to the CCP's damage to the world. The 1989 Tiananmen Square saw thousands of students and citizens die in Beijing. After that, the West imposed sanctions against the CCP, but the sanctions were quickly lifted. Not only that, the CCP was allowed to join the WTO as soon as 2001, and this allowed 350 million Chinese workers whose wages were only 10% of those in developed countries to enter the global trade system all of a sudden. After joining the WTO, China's GDP grew by leaps and bounds, eightfold in 20 years. Total exports grew from 250 billion US dollars in 2008 to 1.2 trillion in 2007, and then to 3.4 trillion US dollars in 2021. A 13-fold increase, and its manufacturing share of the global market quadrupled in 12 years, from 6% in 2001 to 24%. By 2021, this share reached 27.4%. That would be fine if these increases were the result of normal competition and growth, but unfortunately they are not. The CCP relies on unfair means, state subsidies, market dumping, technology theft, forced technology transfer, etc., to gain those. Official US figures show that the CCP's estimated gains from economic espionage are up to 600 billion US dollars and are referred to as the greatest transfer of wealth in history. The CCP is also believed to be responsible for 50 to 80% of cross-border intellectual property theft worldwide, and over 90% of cyber-enabled economic espionage in the United States. The illegal gains by the CCP come from huge losses of other countries. Western countries have seen manufacturing decline and wages dropped from 46% of the GDP to 43.6%. In the first decade after China's accession to the WTO, the US median household income growth rate slowed from 5.3% to 1% in the minimal terms. In real terms, the median household income actually fell 10% during that decade. And these are only the visible losses. As for the less visible aspects, the CCP's penetration and destructive power are even more damning. For example, it has infiltrated Wall Street to the point where Wall Street actually rewrote its rules for the CCP. Companies from other countries and in the United States must undergo vigorous audits to be listed on Wall Street. But Chinese companies can be so bold and say our financial status are state secrets and you are not allowed to audit us, but we will get money from you all the same. No matter how crazy Putin is, I haven't heard him say that he wants to clear out the United States. On the other hand, the Chinese Communist Party generals have made threats such as destroying 200 cities in the US or clearing all people out of the US with bioweapons so that we can take over the US land. A while ago, I talked about the evil tricks proposed by Jin Canrong, a top CCP advisor. He talked about how easy it was to control and manipulate the US congressional elections. He said, generally speaking, the numbers of votes for the two candidates are very close. The gap won't be particularly large. So in the end, I guess there is only a difference of 10,000 or several thousand votes. Therefore, if you can have several thousand votes in your hands, you're as good as his father or his master. And the CCP doesn't just talk, it really takes action. Sometimes it has even impacted US legislation. For example, I previously did an exclusive investigative report on how the CCP was behind a bill passed by the Oregon State Legislature in the US in 2010 to bring Confucius classes to all state public schools. The CCP's mouthpiece People's Daily boasted this achievement by saying that the Legislative Assembly of the state of Oregon passed legislation in 2010 to have public schools in Oregon set up Chinese language courses and Confucius classrooms to promote Chinese language study. It was the first in the United States or even in all the English-speaking countries globally. This initiative was first introduced to the Legislative Assembly by the Joint Committee on Fujian Sister City. And the Joint Committee on Fujian Sister State was headed by a CCP guy called Lan Jing, who actually worked for the CCP's United Front Department, whose main task is overseas influence operation. As we all know, this Confucius institution system at its peak had infiltrated thousands of elementary and secondary schools and over 6 universities across the United States, affecting academic freedom in the US. It dictates what you can and cannot say. Several days ago, I met an American teacher who had worked at the Confucius Institute. When someone came to her to investigate the situation involving the Confucius Institute, she was so afraid that she didn't dare to say anything on campus. Instead, he asked that person to meet her somewhere else. When they did meet and talk, she still felt very uneasy, as if she was doing some dangerous underground work. How ridiculous is that? However, this is the true situation in the US. So in every way, the harm that the CCP has done and will possibly do to the world is many times greater than a single war. Why is no one angry at the CCP? This is precisely what is so frightening. Does anybody still remember this CCP guy. I translated an 18-minute speech of him in December 2020, and that video went viral and ended up in Tucker Carlson's show. Do you see my logo Inconvenient Truth there at the top of the right? President Trump also tweeted about it, and it got 4 million views in just a few days. But YouTube deleted my translated video and gave me a copyright strike. Anyway, just like this top CCP advisor Di Dongshen said, we have people at the top. Because of this, the CCP's crimes are often ignored. Sometimes the elites even work with the CCP or find excuses for its crimes. Now let's go back to the current Russia and Ukraine war. My point is this. If the West, if the United States really wanted to stop it, it might not have been fought at all. The US said that it had information about Putin's troop movements and intention and shared that information with the CCP and asked the CCP to dissuade Putin, right? So my question is, since you had already known Putin's intention, why didn't you try to stop him then? Why did you speak loudly and clearly to Putin? We know what you want to do. If you do that, we will do this. If the US had done this, don't you think that Putin would have at least thought about it twice, waited it more carefully? Instead, Biden did not do so. On the contrary, he actually said, if it is only a minor invention, we will not do anything. We definitely will not be involved militarily, etc. He showed all his cards to Putin as if to encourage him to invade Ukraine quickly. Today, I saw such a sentence on Twitter. The West will keep fighting Russia down to the last Ukrainian. Well, I don't know what your thoughts is about that sentence. I personally don't like conspiracy theories, and I don't believe in them either. But let's look at the facts. Before the war started, Biden's approval rating fell to such a miserable level, and he was booed everywhere he went, and the prospects for this year's midterm election are also very worrying for him. Once the war started, the public's attention was immediately diverted. So this is what I think. If we really care about peace, we should actively promote ceasefire negotiations so that both sides can take a step back. NATO should not make Russia feel threatened, and Russia should not invade neighboring countries. Let both Russia and Ukraine go back to solve their own problems instead of getting deeper and deeper into the war and even pushing humanity to the brink of nuclear war. Talking about nuclear war, let me show you a video in which a CCP fan talks about how Putin should drop nuclear bombs in Europe and then work together with the CCP to destroy the US completely. Please make sure you read the subtitles I added.
大家看一下，这就是俄罗斯，这就是乌克兰，目前在腹基这儿发生战争。然后，如果两个国家打击的话，我感觉如果西欧的国家整个都在支持乌克兰，包括连中立的瑞士都在支持乌克兰他的弹药。如果把北极熊惹毛的话，我建议北极熊这样搞。这不是英国吗？法国和德国3个老牌的资本主义国家，我建议在这中间扔一颗核弹。把这几个老牌的资本主义国家整个给消灭掉，或者是把它变为不毛之地，然后紧接着在这个区域，这是意大利，还有这几个小国家也是紧紧的追随这个北约的组织的国家，在这扔一个核弹，把整个这一块也让它葬身不毛之地。 因为这是看到这是北纬60度线，这是以东南和西北风为主，所以说这一片如果整体污染的话，西班牙一定会不保。所以整盘的包括葡萄牙、西班牙，整个就会变成核辐射区，整个的西欧将会葬身火海，融为一个大火炉，或者融为一个新的那个切尔诺贝利。紧接着欧洲俄罗斯迁都莫斯科，从莫斯科迁都，因为俄罗斯的纵深比较长，它可以迁都到这儿。大家知道这有一个霍尔木兹海峡，然后它这有一个中年不动港，它可以把首都迁到这儿，和中国背靠背。因为这边整个变成核辐射区之后，大西洋整个都没法，都是变成不毛之地。当然北非这块我们不管它啊。中国和俄罗斯背靠背，面对的是太平洋，面对的首先是日本，紧接着是美国。我们要想打仗的话，必须得越过庞大的太平洋。如果美国的核动力航空母舰赶来的话，中国和俄罗斯背靠背，把它葬身到大西洋里面。新的第三次世界大战彻底把美国打服。反正俄罗斯都已经放弃了，把蒙古吃进去，俄罗斯和中国背靠背，哈萨克斯坦整个全部吞并，这边的国家整个放弃。大家有没有赞同我意见的？
Well, what do you think after watching this? The reason I translated this video is to show the Western public how terrifying the mindset of these CCP fans are. They do not feel guilty at all when talking about dropping nuclear bombs. Although I don't know how many people like this there are in China, it is scary enough to have just one, let alone more than one. 2 days ago, I also translated this video in which this man also said that he wanted to donate 6,000 yuan to Russia and told Putin to drop the nuclear bombs quickly. So, in conclusion, I have always thought that the most important war in the world is the war between the free world and the evil specter of communism. Not only the evil specter of communism in China, but in the Western world too. This is the real battle that concerns the life and death of mankind. It doesn't necessarily involve guns or bombs, but it has already started. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't, or consider signing up for a membership or making a donation. Like I said earlier, because of YouTube suppression, I hardly make anything here. Thank you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend.